welcome back. My name is Sheldon McLeod, and this is Thinking Out Loud, presented to you here on the SaltWire Network. Remind you again to search out the new SaltWire YouTube channel, subscribe and like and all that goes along with that. It's a real great place for you to find all the videos my colleagues are working on. This has been a tough week in the news cycle. And in fact, I don't know if you saw this story yet. Perhaps you have. This is a story of a woman from Cape Breton who actually died after leaving the ER. She was waiting for 7 hours, and this was on the 30th of December, so before Allison Holthoff's story became public. And the reason I mention that is I had also happened across another post from someone I know on Facebook who had said that they had visited an emergency department back in October, and it was only through perhaps sheer determination, maybe a little bit of stubbornness, I'll put it that way, that Amy Graves said, I'm not going. I'm going to stay until I'm seen. So Amy Graves, good to see you again. So just quickly, I know we spoke last about your aneurysm recovery. How is that going so far?
Good so far. I mean, I'm slowly getting my mobility and other things back, my vision. I'm going to be blind in one eye permanently, but at least I can have 20/20 in my other. So things are on the ups.
So tell me what happened in October.
Due to the aneurysm and the stroke, I'm on blood thinners. And I guess what ended up happening, I awoke in a huge amount of pain. I didn't know what was going on, but I was just in an extreme amount of pain. I knew something wasn't right. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I waited till probably 2 o'clock and was like, I was starting to get the pain was moving down my arm. And I was worried, like, oh no, this is what happened when I had a stroke. I knew something it didn't feel right. So I waited till 2 and it just kept getting worse. The pain was moving. Sorry. Oh my gosh. Yeah, the pain was getting increasingly bad. So I told my spouse, let's go back to the emergency room. Mm-hmm. It's been a place I've been a lot, unfortunately, this year. And I really only go if I feel that it's an absolute necessary, because I anticipate a lengthy wait and I have to be in a lot of pain or know something's wrong before I go. I'm not going for a cough or because I don't feel well. Mm-hmm. So I made my way. And my spouse asked me, do you want me to call an ambulance? And from past experience, I'm like, no, we live 5 minutes from Kempville Hospital. We'll actually get there faster if you drive me. I'll try to get in my wheelchair and see if I can make it in the car and then out of the car, because I'm going to have to move whether I get an ambulance or your vehicle. So he drove me to the hospital and we ended up, oh gosh. I mean, we waited and they ran blood work on me first. The pain was still increasing to the point, like, I was in tears. I was crying in my wheelchair in the waiting room. I probably would have crawled up in the fetal position if I wasn't such a germaphobe, because it was a hospital floor. But they did blood work, came back normal, did x-ray, came back normal. And they said, do you want to, this was the first time I was asked, do you want to stay? Everything's coming back normal. And I was like, no, I specifically asked for a CT scan. I'm like, there's something wrong. I've never been in this amount of pain. Even my aneurysm, I don't remember this amount of pain. And my checkered medical past too made me feel uncomfortable about leaving and going home, because I have done that in the past. And as we know, I've had a bad outcome. So I said, no, I don't feel comfortable leaving until I get a CAT scan. There's definitely something wrong. Something's going on. I could barely get in the CAT scan machine. I was in so much pain. I can remember the CAT scan people, you could tell they were kind of, I was something they didn't see every day. I could barely lay down on my back, and it took me forever to get on there. I was just crying in tears and pain. The CAT scan came back and it showed internal bleeding. They assumed it was because I was on blood thinners, because there was no trauma that I could remember for like falling, car accidents. I literally woke up in agonizing pain. And so they thought you must be bleeding because you're on blood thinners, but we don't know where you're bleeding from. There's so much blood in your abdomen on the scan, we can't tell where it's coming from. So that was probably 10 o'clock in the morning. I'd been there since 2, where I finally got the answer, at least where I knew it was internal bleeding. It wasn't a stroke or a complication from an aneurysm. They had some sort of answer. So I began throwing up at that point. I was in so much pain. And actually, I don't know if it was from the pain or the painkillers they were trying to give me now to help the pain. But I was nauseous. I was vomiting. I had a barf bag basically right next to my face. And they were like, we're going to try some more imaging to figure out where you're bleeding from. And we're going to try to find a place for you, I guess, a bed where you can lie down, because at this time it had been probably 12 hours of sitting up in a wheelchair before I even got a cot. All they could find me was a recliner hospital chair. So they moved me to that. So at least I could somewhat lay back and relax, but yeah.
So I guess what really kind of prompted this is you saw Allison Holthoff's story, how she had gone in and was waiting and waiting. And now we have this other tragic story that we hear about another family that someone went and it was a 7-hour wait before they were even seen. So just so we're clear, you did present it at 2 a.m. You were able to at least be seen by medical professionals, correct?
Oh, yes. They had no idea. I didn't have a diagnosis, but I was in the midst of tests. I probably got the diagnosis at, I don't know, the next day around. It was getting close to lunchtime. So between 1 in the morning and lunchtime is when I actually finished my CT scan, and they said they realized I was bleeding internally, and that's why I was in so much pain. And they had it was close to 12 hours.
They had suggested that you go home at one point, and so. Oh
yeah, they said, "Do you want to go home? Your blood work's coming back normal, and your X-ray came back normal." And I said, "No, I'm in so much pain. I need a CAT scan, and I just know something's not right." So that's when they CAT scanned me and realized I was in pain, I was in internal bleeding. That was what was causing the pain. And then that point, I didn't even get admitted. They said, listen, we've gone over the additional scans, because I waited to do a second scan to see if they could figure out where I was bleeding from. And they said, we can't tell where you're bleeding from still, because there's too much blood in your stomach that's blocking the imaging. But we do know, because they put some kind of dye in you, we know that you're not actively bleeding, because we would be able to see from the dye where it was coming from and not just floating around in your stomach kind of thing. That's how they explained it to me.
Right. And
they said, we suggest, again, we can give you some painkillers, because we know internal bleeding is really painful. And the only way we can clear it up is time. So we can give you a prescription for morphine and send you on your way, and you can come back if your symptoms get unbearable. And I'm like, well, they are unbearable right now. Like presently, I'm vomiting in a bag in front of you and can barely, I have a hard time laying on my back. Like, I had this sweet spot that I had to stay in, and if I moved, it was excruciating pain. And that's when I said, no, I don't feel comfortable going home, because I have before, and just wait and see what happens, and then come back and have to wait all over again. I've already been at the hospital for 24 hours at this point, and I was still sitting in a chair and they still didn't know where I was bleeding from.
So just to kind of go back to the reason that you felt you wanted to say publicly, the story of people showing up at the ER and unfortunately passing away in ER. So what was it that you were hoping would come of your experience? What were you hoping would come of sharing your experience?
Oh gosh, I don't even know where to start, because I feel bad for the healthcare staff, because it's not like they don't want to help me, or I don't think they were purposely being negligent or anything like that. They just are run off their feet. I remember in emergency, you used to, wait. It wasn't a quick wait, but maybe an hour or two. And you would go out back to a cot or a bed, and then the doctor would see you there. When I was in emergency with the internal bleeding, there was none of that. I would go get testing done and then be back out in the waiting room, sitting in my wheelchair. In agonizing pain. Like I said, it wasn't a cough or flu or sniffles. Like I can't even explain. It was more than childbirth. It was more than my brain aneurysm, if you can believe it. And I guess blood is an irritant. Where in your abdomen, like it's not supposed to be there. So that's why I was in so much pain. And finally, a doctor. I had been in emergency I had refused to go home at 2 points. And finally he said, I understand why you're concerned, because actually this doctor knew me from previous times in the emergency room. He said, I can see why you're hesitating to go home, but this is not the place for you. We don't have any beds to put you. A doctor needs to admit you if you stay in emergency for more than 24 hours. So we have no doctors that are willing to admit you because you don't need surgery. We don't know where the blood came from. I forget the other things, but he said I needed a doctor to admit me to their department, and I didn't fit in any of the boxes that beds were available. And I just said, well, I'll stay in emergency as long as I can, and hopefully a doctor admits me. And a doctor came in that morning. So I'd been there over 24 hours, almost 48 hours at that point, because it would be 24 hours that night I came in, or 48 hours that night. And he came in and looked at my blood work that I just got taken again, because it was morning. It's routine. I guess everyone gets blood work. It was like 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. And he got it back, and he looked at it and he said, your hemoglobin levels have dropped significantly. There is no way you can go home. And I could overhear him on the phone making phone calls to doctors within the hospital. Will you please take this lady? We cannot send her home. Like, she has to go somewhere. She can't stay in the emergency room sitting in her wheelchair for 2 days. Like, he was actually, I was really grateful to that doctor. I wish I could remember his name, but now my memory is horrible. But I can remember thanking him, because not that the previous doctors gave me negligent care or anything. I just felt they were run off their feet, and they were trying to get me out of there because they couldn't help me. And he took the time and kind of went for bat. And it turns out, he told me that usually with internal bleeding, your blood work looks normal at first, but it takes a certain amount of time for those levels to really drop, the hemoglobin levels. So they had finally dropped on their readings, and I needed several transfusions. I got admitted to the ICU, and I was there for a week getting iron. I believe it was iron transfusions, because I had lost so much blood.
This is so often a story that we hear. I mean, so many tragic outcomes, and you said you felt the situation that happened with Allison Holthoff could very well have been yourself. And as you recognize the challenges in the system with the people who are overworked, overwhelmed. So what is your advice? What would you like people to know, Amy, about this situation and the crisis in healthcare?
Oh, well, I guess first of all, I don't think the frustration should lay on the staff. It's like I'm torn, because I have a lot of anger. Well, I don't want to say, you can say anger, frustration with the system itself and how it's failed me. And you always look for someone to blame, even though maybe, blame isn't a good word, but you want to find the problem, and you want to be able to like rationalize why that bad thing happened to you. Where did life go wrong to make this happen? And I really don't think it's the staff or the doctors. I just think it's gotten to the point where the system is on a verge of collapse, and they're working as hard as they can, and burnout setting in, and they're overlooking things and trying to keep things moving, trying to get beds empty. And in the process, they're overlooking possibly fatal situations.
Well, Amy, I know it's been a tough few years for you. I'm happy to be able to talk to you about this, and we know that other families have had to experience something a whole lot worse in a lot of ways, and not to diminish at all the pain and suffering that you've gone through. And I know that you were quite empathetic towards Allison Holthoff's family and what they had gone through. So very much.
I can't imagine.
Yeah.
I can't imagine to pass away after knowing what internal bleeding feels like, to just know she was in agonizing pain for that many hours and her family had to watch her in that kind of pain. Because I know mine might have not been as significant as hers. It's not a trauma Olympics, but just knowing that that was her final moments is very unsettling when it's preventable, from what I know, a preventable death.
Well, we'll certainly be interested in hearing what the final report says if we all find out that information publicly. Amy Graves, I wish you nothing but continued recovery in your health struggles, and I know you try to keep a positive light on things, so I wish you nothing but the best. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you.